Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Friday's webinar from Annika Digital. It's myself and Stanley today. This is the first webinar since Easter. I had a lovely week off, and by the time I'd got round to doing all the analysis of the actual survey, I realised that we needed to skip it a week's. But what we're going to be doing today is very different. We carried out a survey in February and March to try and understand a number of things. So that's what's going to be the subject of today's presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to dive in, but please do ask questions in the text or in the Q&A. Also, you should be able to go over to the handouts and download the results. We will be producing this as a proper PDF with a little bit more design, but hopefully there'll be lots of useful stuff in there for you to take away. Okay, so a few introductions then. So I thought I'd do a little different bio today. So what I wanted to do was, instead of just sort of having lots of pictures, I thought I'd give you a bit of a timeline. It sort of illustrates just how old I am, but also that I've had a bit of a checkered history working mainly in science and marketing, and to be honest, they still overlap. So this is just to sort of explain some of the various roles that I've done. And actually, I founded Annika in 2007. So we've been running Annika for over 15 years now, which is brilliant. The other thing I wanted to do for some of the newbies is just sort of give you an idea of who we work with and the type of clients we work with. Although we do quite a lot of stuff locally, our specialist areas are sort of manufacturing, medical, logistics, constructions, and the sort of supply chain around there. But we do work with a mix of direct to market, e-commerce, and also some global companies as well. We've got some great awards and lots of accreditations. And my great news for a Friday is last night we actually won the best agency campaign in the UK Biddable Awards, which is a great accolade. And I know Caroline Spence is in the room, and she helped me put the awards together with Amy. And thank you for the team and the guys at the NHS, because it was a brilliant piece of work using a whole range of different techniques for trying to get over 1,500 consultations for the NHS for the new hospitals. Thank you, William. And the reason it was such an interesting project is because we use so many different platforms: Snapchat, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, AdSmart TV. It was a real mix, and it's great that because we were trying to get to the BAME and some of the hard to reach communities in Leicestershire for the NHS, it was a real success. So well done everybody that was involved in that project. Okay, so let's go on a little bit about the survey then, which is the main topic of the day. So first of all, I'll give you a little bit of information about the objectives and the methodology. So what we wanted to do, this was actually an idea from the content team. And it was really interesting working with the content team, with Sarah and Sirk and Mark, and obviously Amy said she's joined the content team. Was that we wanted to do a survey to try and understand digital marketing skills originally, but then what we decided to do was extend it and actually try and understand how COVID had changed the environment and had impacted on marketing activities. And having invested so much time and effort into the survey, we also decided that we wanted to make it an annual survey to see how activities will change in time. So what we did was we identified the core topics that we wanted to evaluate, and we used Google Forms to create the survey. And we had actually around 20 questions. But we did ask quite a few questions to try and understand the actual makeup of the respondents, to see whether any of the characteristics, for example, if they were B2B or B2C, whether they're e-com or lead gen, or the size of the company, whether any of those factors actually influence the results. And interestingly, in the majority of cases, it had absolutely very little effect at all. So that was quite reassuring in a way because as we got the results in, we saw that they didn't change a huge amount. And it did illustrate the fact that the survey, that the sample was actually a reasonably significant from a point of view of the actual variability of the results. We then used our blog, email database, social media profiles, and our webinars to promote the survey and gather responses. And we did actually offer an incentive, and that went to Hakes. So I think Anne Marie's on the call this morning, and they've taken up a day's worth of consultancy as their reward, as being the winner of the sort of raffle of all the people that actually took part. So thanks everybody that did take part. Yes, William's just made a note about some research as well. So it would be really good if you could add a link in there, which would be very useful. And maybe if the Innovation Centre or the university's doing anything on that, it would be great to see some of those results as well. So what I've done is I've done a bit of a snapshot of the key findings. I've deliberately not given in many numbers apart from one to give you an idea of what's coming. When this goes into the final actual report, and it's been sort of QC'd by my team, we'll actually do this more as an infographic. But at the moment, for the benefit of today, there was actually 90 responses altogether. We only really had about 3 or 4 weeks to gather the responses. And I think once we've repeated this, I'm sure we'll get a lot more in the future. But actually, that ended up being quite a representative sample because we had such a mix of number of companies and organisations across whole range of number of employees and revenue as well, ranging from sort of less than 100,000 to over 100 million in the range, and you'll get all the data on that. They came from many sectors and had a range of product services and various routes to market. They had various marketing capabilities. There was a mix of in-house teams, dedicated individuals. Some people were using their office manager as a part-time resource, and then quite a lot of people were using some outsourced resources. And again, interestingly, it didn't seem to matter what size the company was. People tended to use freelancers and agencies on quite a regular basis. One of the most surprising results for me was 16% didn't say they had a website. Now, that might mean that they did, but they didn't mention it, or that they could be at the beginning of the process. But I was quite surprised by that result. And, they obviously use a lot of other methods of getting to market. But 16% not having a website was, quite a shock to me. The other thing that was interesting was that we had a very, quite a big proportion of people were selling services, although quite a lot of people were selling services and products. You'll see that in a minute. But it didn't really matter because many organisations had a sales team, and they used a mix of online and offline routes to market. So one of the biggest conclusions for me was don't make too many assumptions about how people are selling and getting their brand in front of potential customers. There didn't seem, if you just look at the graphs at face value, you could easily jump to the conclusion that all to the B2B guys were selling to services and were selling through a lead generation site. But actually, when you looked at the individual pieces of data, that wasn't the case at all. It was actually much more diverse mix than that. So I think that's a really important takeaway, is don't make too many assumptions when you look at the data at face value. You have to dive into the detail to do the analysis, rather than just looking at a few pretty graphs that you get from Google Forms and SurveyMonkey and places like that. Now, the next thing that we delved into is the use, the knowledge and performance of different digital marketing channels. And actually, we included some traditional channels as a general group as well. So I think, unsurprisingly, because I've been in marketing for 25 years now, the use, the performance and knowledge were very, very much the traditional owned and earned channels. Owned is what you control yourself, and earned is things like PR and social media, which other people talk about you. So email, organic social, and CRM, which is customer relationship marketing, were by far the most popular, highly used, and this is where the skills were. So this is why I would consider the sort of the traditional Chartered Institute marketing traditional route. And many were actually using traditional offline marketing as well. But the thing that I found, I guess, surprising were the channels that weren't so heavily used. And now, TV, radio, and marketplaces, Amazon, etc., wasn't a surprise because obviously you've got to have an e-commerce or a product to sell to use Amazon. And TV and radio, you've got to have bigger budgets. But Spotify, you can use for literally peanuts. But actually, in some cases, paid social, paid search, and paid display were actually being underused as well. I'm just going to take a sip of water, excuse me. The interesting one was paid search, because paid search was actually was so polarized, because for some people it had a very high level of use and performance, and other people it wasn't used at all. So that was quite a polarized response. The other two that I was quite surprised at, and actually think that there's a massive opportunity here, was marketing automation software, or MAS, and conversion optimization, or conversion rate optimization, or CROs. Sorry for all the acronyms, guys, but these were really underused. They appear to underperform, and there was a lack of knowledge. Now, I did do a correlation between knowledge and use, and I think this might be the reason behind this. But for me, CRM, which was being heavily used, actually, marketing automation is a sort of a natural extension of that. So there's a massive opportunity there. And conversion rate optimization, which is a service that we really struggle to convince people to invest in, is an obvious opportunity, because if you can improve the effectiveness of your website, you'll get more out of all of your channels. And interestingly, web development and web design and creativity and the creative assets came very highly in the well-used pot. So there seems to be maybe a lack of understanding of the terminology, or a lack of understanding of the opportunities that these channels can offer. What was really surprising for me was that the size and income of an organization was pretty irrelevant when it came to a lot of these criteria. So I do think that you've got organizations at both ends of the spectrum, with different levels of skills or different levels of use. So actually, you again, you have to dive into the detail. And then with regards to what companies were planning to do, we did have, a wide split, and we did have a few companies that were quite adversely affected by COVID. Obviously, we've seen a little bit of a recovery for most companies from that, probably with the exception of the event industry, and to a certain extent hospitality are just sort of getting back on their feet. But the shock to me, or the pleasant surprise, if you want to call it, is just how many organizations, a majority of organizations were planning to increase their overall marketing activities. They were going to increase the amount of planning they were doing, brand awareness, lead generation, and sales. So if you haven't thought about that yet, you really need to get your act together, because your competitors are, and they're planning to do something about it. So it's very important you don't get left behind. Now, the other thing that was interesting was the budgets, and there was a huge range of budgets and how they were spending the budgets, and whether they were spending it fully on digital or whether they were doing a mix of other traditional marketing. But 1 to 5% was the most common, and this was the most common across all sizes of organisation and revenue. And most were leaving their budgets unchanged or increasing them for next year. So there was actually, a shift, often people going up to the next band. So I think if you aren't spending, 5%, or you're not spending 6 to 10%, you need to be thinking about that. And if you're an e-commerce client where you're actually having to probably spend 15 to 25%, just be aware that your competitors are planning to spend more and you don't want to be left behind. Okay, so let's go into more details. So first of all, what they sold. So as I said, there was 90. So in some cases there's a percentage, in some cases there's the actual figures. So 79% sold services and 44% sold products. So you can see the overlap. So if you just looked at the Google Forms data, oh yeah, well, majority actually just sold services, but actually there's a significant overlap. The others were things like SaaS products, which can be used by both, I guess, but they just treated them slightly differently. So you can see that there was a big majority of people, and that isn't really surprising if you look at the number of local companies and things, the type of companies, which I'll sort of show you in a second. So services, 22% of the people that answered the survey were marketing or in advertising, which I guess isn't really surprising because it's their role. And then you can see how it gradually went down: technology and software, manufacturing, membership. There was a few charities, events, etc. So this is sort of a bit of a reflection of our target audience, of the sorts of people come onto our webinars every week, and also the types of clients we've got and the people that I'm connected to. Now, products, we had, you can see the combined number there. And this, I think, is more of a reflection of the sorts of clients, again, that we work with and the sorts of companies. But there's quite a few manufacturing in there, also some home and garden. Now, who they sell to, if you flick back, that graph looks quite similar. But actually, it's very, very different. So although we've got business to business being the majority, if you add business to business, you can see that we've got quite a large number between them. And then if you then look, I think I may have the wrong table on this one. I might need to edit that. Yeah. So if we just look at the graph for now, and I'll make the amends to this because I realized I've copied it across and not copied the table across. So as you can see, 56 and 20, so that's sort of 76, which is about 3/4 of them are selling business to business. But then if you look at the number that are selling to both, that's actually quite a large amount. And if you think about it, you can sell products to both, but also a lot of services can be sold to both as well. The types of website, now again, a lot of people would naturally assume the services will use a lead generation website, and products will automatically use an e-commerce website. But there was a large number that actually had both. There was 16%. And this no website was a bit of a surprise. But again, the types of website didn't really correlate with whether they were selling products or services, or whether they were selling both. And there wasn't a distinct correlation with who they sold to, whether it was B2B and B2C again. So again, you have to almost create a much more complex Venn diagram to really understand the relationship between all of those. The other thing that was very important was that a lot of them had their own sales staff. 44% had their own sales staff. 36% only use websites, and there was about 17% that didn't have sales staff but used other routes to market. So it's easier to see this on this next table, where you can see all the different combinations. So if you add these guys up, that adds up to 90, and then you can see the breakdown in between there. So again, if you just look at it at the top level, it's quite deceptive. So you can see that there are a lot of other types of routes to market, including using third-party sellers, having your own physical store or trade desk. So there was quite a mix of different ways that people were getting to their target audience. Now, this is a little bit more about the size of the companies and the number of staff. So you can see that we did have quite a large, about a third of all the companies had a turnover of less than 500,000. And there was quite a lot of people that were self-employed or were 1 to 10. So about a third that employed less than 10. Interestingly, if you look at the statistics for the UK as a whole, this is actually significantly underrepresented because there's about 90 odd percent of businesses, actually a number of businesses are in this category. So if you look at if you look at these graphs next to each other, immediate assumption, oh, this is the same group. But again, that wasn't true. So what I did here was I analysed the size of the company and then I put them into their different pots of revenue to give you the spread. So of course, yeah, 27% of organisations employed less than 10% and had a turnover of 100,000. That's those two. That was the biggest proportion. But 39% of organisations employed more than 10 staff and had a turnover of more than $1 million. So this is all this lot here. So you can see there was a huge spread, which is another reason why I thought that the sample was pretty good. And 22% of the organisations or the respondents had a turnover of more than 5 million. So you can see it was a really good range of different types of companies. And what that meant was that when I did the other analysis, I could look at this and see whether there was any patterns, and you'll see that in a bit. This was the sectors, so I did sort of allude to some of this earlier on, and you can see the range of sectors that were included in the survey. And these were the locations. So we did actually have 2 people outside of the UK, and as expected, sort of 30% were Leicester, 11% Nottingham. The map of the postcodes, that was just 75%. That was because of the way that the tool limited the number that I could load, and also there was also some duplicates. So actually, that's a reasonable size sample, and also if you look at it, it's pretty representative of what we saw. Okay, so the next section is the knowledge levels and skills. We're just going to go into that in a little bit more detail. So the first thing I wanted to find out was who does the marketing. The way that I've presented this graph is, I just need to explain it. So this column here is when they're the only ones that are doing it. So someone else's role, part-time role, 14%, dedicated individual, 14%, a dedicated team, 30%, and outsourced to a freelancer or consultancy, 6%. So this is companies that only use outsource. This is companies that have a dedicated team. Now you can see that actually there was lots of combinations, and in fact it's too complicated for me to try and create a Venn diagram for this. So for example, in the case of having a dedicated team, 30% had a dedicated team, but in addition to that, 49% or half had a team and used one of these other combinations. So you can see it was a little bit more complicated. So I think this is really interesting. 32% outsourced to a third party, which is my second point here. And the most interesting thing about that was there was really very little correlation with the size of the company. And actually, uses of outsources happened at various different stages of the maturity of companies. So if you were really small, you were using probably a freelancer or a consultant, but if you were massive, you were probably using an agency for specific tasks. So I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, and one of the only correlations that I did find was that 49% of the organisations did have a dedicated team, and 80% of these employed 10 or more staff. So this means that we didn't really start to see a dedicated marketing team until businesses were employing 10 or more people. Now, you've got 20% that were less than that, and some of these were sort of digital only companies. So that would probably be, the majority of those. But I thought that was an interesting one, because one of the most useful things somebody told me was, if you want to be a agency or a business that's twice the size, twice the turnover, then you need to start acting like it. So one of the things that would imply to me is that once you know that you're on a growth strategy, you need to bring that dedicated team of marketeers in, maybe earlier than you would have considered before, and they can help you grow, and therefore they pay for themselves pretty quickly. The level of knowledge was interesting, and formed quite a bell-shaped curve here. Nobody said they had no knowledge at all. I'm guessing if they didn't have any knowledge, then they probably wouldn't have completed the survey. And you can see that the median is good, but you've got a range. And only 8 people out of the 90 rated themselves as excellent. So 31% of people, which is these two, rated themselves as very good and excellent. And there was very little impact to the size or turnover. So you could be a one-man band and still regard yourself as being excellent. But 64% of these, 2/3 of them, did have their own dedicated team. So there seems to be a correlation with having your own team and an improvement in skills levels and knowledge, which isn't really surprising. I mean, if you bring in your own team and they don't know their stuff, then maybe you need to look at either upskilling them or getting rid of them. 34 or 37% that are only acceptable poor, which is this too. And again, the turnover of the company did not make any difference at all. So 19 out of 34% had a turnover of 1 million. This is a little bit worrying, because you would have thought that if they're that big, they should actually have got a decent team together. And similarly, the size of the company didn't make much difference either. So of the 34 employed that employed more than 10 staff, 16 out of them had what we would consider a poor or unacceptable. So again, just because you've got you are a bigger company, you need to look at upskilling your staff, because I think that is one of the big messages here, that in most cases 1/3 of people are unhappy with the level of skills and knowledge, which means or they're acceptable. It's not really good enough, really. It's not competitive advantage, so it's definitely an area to improve. Okay, so this is a more complicated graph, and I'm going to introduce a couple of these. I've tried to use a traffic light system to make it easier. The exception in this one is the blue at the end, because that is actually utilization of an external resource. So on the left, we've got the type of channel, and I've used the same ones throughout all my analysis, which if you do any surveys, I absolutely recommend, because you can then compare them. So the red, and they're in order of whether they have almost no knowledge or they're not applicable. So you can see these are the reds get higher and higher as we go down. And you can see that the ones with the no knowledge or not applicable is mainly marketplaces and digital TV and radio, marketing automation and conversion rate optimization, which I did mention in the introduction as being the channels that seem to be underutilized. Then the the orange means basic skills but training required. Yellow is started to use. Light green is skills in-house and started to implement. And then highly proficient is the dark green. And then the blue one is use external agency if needed. Now, you just need to understand that doesn't really correlate with the type of skills in-house. Because as I've already mentioned, people will use an external agency if they have, there is a bit of a correlation, which I'll explain later, but it doesn't really correlate with things like the size of the company, etc. But I'll reveal that in a minute, because I think it's better that you see the data as I explain it. So what you see is that the ones where you've got high levels of knowledge and high levels of skills and use are branding, web development, email marketing, organic social, analytics, content marketing, search engine optimization. customer relationship marketing. So and even traditional here. So these are all what I would call the owned and earned, the tradition, the remit of the traditional marketeer who is going to be using these. Web design and development, you'll notice that did have a lot of agency use. I think that's because when people are working on their website, they do need to get some external skills. And I'm guessing that the people that are, have put this highly, it's because they're updating the website regularly, they're blogging, they're adding content on a regular basis. Now, for me, the surprising, because obviously we do a huge amount of this, is how low all the paid strategies are, and also digital PR is right down there. Now, traditional PR was included in this one, but for PR to be so low, and it's so important as part of the search engine optimization strategy. So, Amy, if you're watching this, this is really good for you guys because there's a massive opportunity to do digital PR. The same with Ed for conversion rate optimization, which is a big part of what we do. And marketing automation, which is, I've been banging on about marketing automation for about 7 years now. And it's only really in the last year when people like HubSpot and Marketo and Zoho have really got their act together, that's become more popular. And we use a completely different platform called SharpSpring. So I think this is interesting, and it definitely fell into a number of different camps. I would suggest that the bottom 3 or 4 are the ones that people aren't using, particularly the bottom 2. So this is trying to understand, and this is just giving the figures in a little bit more detail. So what I've done is I've taken the organizations that have the skills in-house or highly proficient. So that is the green there. And then at the bottom, this is the ones they have no knowledge or they're not applicable. So this is the orange and red. And you can see the ones that scored most highly. Okay, so the next one is when people use a digital marketing agency. So you can see, and this was an agency, but could have included a freelancer or a consultant. So you can see this is in area of popularity. So the first one is digital PR, that's being outsourced, and web design and development. Now that doesn't surprise me that web design and development is being outsourced. And then you can see that some of the paid ones are being outsourced, and then SEO is being outsourced. So interestingly, it doesn't really reflect the popularity or the effectiveness, and and I think that's quite useful to know. And I think the message here is, if you don't understand it or you haven't got the skills in house, don't be afraid of outsourcing it, whether it's to a freelancer or to an agency, because everybody, a lot of other people, between 10 and 20% of people are basically doing that on a regular basis. Okay, so with regard to key findings, the marketing channels used, again, I've used my traffic light scheme. And again, I've ordered it. And this time what I've done is I've ordered it slightly differently. So I've ordered it this time in the ones that are being used in weekly or daily. So the lime green and the dark green. So these two here. So you can see these are the most popular ones. And that's sort of the order that they're being ranked in there. Okay. So what you see again is that the owned and earned, web design, social, organic social, CRM, content marketing, branding, analytics, search engine optimization, email, traditional. These are all really heavily in use. And then paid search sneaks in there, my favorite. And then down at the bottom, you've got the ones that weren't very popular before. So you've got your paid social, display, conversion rate optimization. So the ones that people don't think they've got a lot of knowledge of. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? Because paid search is both very well used, it's very polarized, and then on the other hand, there's a big chunk of people that don't use it. So you either fall into that I'm using paid search camp or I'm not. So it's definitely quite polarized. So again, the most popular being used daily or weekly, this is in the percentages: organic social, web design and development, content marketing, CRM. Now, this is a reflection of just how many companies had sales teams. So I think that was really interesting because, usually larger sales teams use CRM. Then branding and then paid search sneaks in at number 6. And then you look at the least, the least popular, and you've got paid search. I think is number 7. So you can see these ones I don't think are being used at all, and it's nearly all paid channels, which is really surprising. Now, when you look at knowledge, what I did here was you can see I've color coded these using conditional formatting, and they're in order. And they're in order. These are in order, I think, of how often they're used. So that goes up. Yeah, that's one. So never, rarely, or occasionally used. So at the top, so that means that they do. So these ones down here are the ones that are used the least or least applicable. So these, in theory, should be the ones that are used the most. And you can see there's a pretty good correlation with that. And then these are the ones where you've got your various levels of knowledge. So in this case, no knowledge or not being used. And again, green is higher. And this is the ones that have got skills in-house or highly proficient. So these are on one scale and these are on the other. And then what I've done is I've color coded them. So the green is an indicative of high levels of knowledge, high levels of use. And the red is low levels of knowledge and low level of use. And you can see there is a massive correlation between them. Now, if you stick the use of agency in there, that correlation pretty much disappears. Oh, does it? Ah, you see, web design and development. All of us use a third party for that. So or most of us use a third party for that. So that's got a very high correlation usage. And then actually what you see is these ones that are not used very often, or there's a low level or there's a higher level of knowledge, people are less likely to use an agency because they can do it in-house. When you start to get down to SEO, digital PR, video, and then the paid, you see that you start to get the higher levels of use. So to me, this is all about the skill sets of the marketeers. The ones where people feel proficient and don't need to use an agency is the stuff that, I was taught in my CIM exams 20 years ago. Whereas all the new stuff, all the paid, all the digital PR, etc., all the complicated technical stuff, like Amazon, like conversion rate optimization, like web design, that's when you use an agency. So this was really interesting. Sorry if I've not explained it quite as articulate as I would like to, but I do think that by if you sort of ignore the numbers a little bit, but by using the heat map, you can really see the current levels of skills and the gaps in skills of around digital, etc. Okay, now the other one that's interesting is which ones performed well and where there was a level of success. So again, what I've done is I've done it in reverse order based on the people that weren't using them or not done by us, where there's a poor performance. So this is effectively in the order where the ones at the bottom are the ones that aren't being used. So again, a big chunk of not being used, Amazon and digital TV and radio, which doesn't surprise me. It doesn't apply to 75% of you. Paid display and marketing automation, again, nearly 50%. I would hope that more of you would be using marketing automation, and similarly CRO. And then you've got the paid ones, and you've got to have a budget for those, so that's why they slip into there. And again, paid search, you've got this big chunk of people that don't use it, and then you've got a big chunk of people that do use it. So again, the ones that appear to be most successful, I don't know, is it just because people are using them more? Is that they feel more comfortable with them? But it's definitely following that owned and earned group. And then the ones that aren't being used or not considered to be as successful are the ones where the skill levels are lower. You need budget, and maybe people are just not very confident with these techniques. So this is just a summary of those two again, and you can see that paid search appears in both. So 34% of people find paid search to be most successful, and 42% of people found it least popular or least successful. Okay, so let's go on to business and marketing objectives then. So this is what your business objective would be post-COVID. Now, we did this survey during mainly in January and February, so people were still in lockdown. So just to give you some context of the timing of when we got the responses, and 62% of people said they wanted to take advantage of new opportunities and growth arising from COVID. Then you've got 40% of people were planning to grow, 1 to 20% of growth. And then 35%, and we include ourselves in this, were planning to grow by more than 20%. Now, that's from the current position. So obviously, you'd expect that to happen if everybody had dropped back significantly. But interestingly, recover from lockdown and bring the business back to similar levels pre-COVID actually ranked lower, and survive the impacts of COVID and keep the business afloat. I'm really sorry, guys, there was still 30%. Now, we did know we got quite a lot of entertainment venues, exhibitions, tourism. So, we've got quite a few clients in that category. So these guys were obviously adversely affected. And then business as usual, carry on as we're doing. So 21%. And then there were a few others in there where people had the opportunity to write their own thing down. But to me, this is brilliant news. 62%, planning, people aren't giving up. I didn't have anybody saying, that's it, we're throwing in the cards. I guess the people that were doing the survey by then probably knew that they were going to make it work. And then marketing objectives, which is in a little bit more detail. Some of these are a little bit reflected. And these are in the order of the ones where they're the priority or most important. So effectively, that's that going down. So again, this was really great to see. You've got here sort of 80% of people put winning new customers as a priority or most important. And then, if you then add important in there, it was 95% wanted to win new customers, maintain or increasing market share, promote new products and services, improve marketing performance and efficiency, new channel to market, new locations. And then I got some more specific things like, better measurement analytics, etc. Now, what was surprising was levels of upskilling, considering the results that already found. I think this was because people were probably still have people furloughed. You've got to get back to full capacity before you can recruit. And I do regret not splitting those two out into two separate ones, because I think that, and I'll do that in future, because I think recruiting and upskilling existing are quite different. So that was a little bit of an error on my part. A reason, 50% of people were planning to use external resources, which is great news for us. And again, you've got some of this is repeat above, but and quite a low level of investing in, only 50% of people were thinking about investing in new technology. So obviously the priority is to win the business first and then invest. So it seems to be more about recovery and growth and then investment second. And that's just the same thing with the numbers associated, so you can actually see. Now, this was interesting as well, and I've just picked out the top 6 here, and this is what people were going to change as a result of COVID. So the blue was not applicable. Less meant you're going to do less of them. Same, you're going to do, the same as last year and more. And what I've done is I picked out the ones with the highest level of activity, or where you've got between sort of 45 and 65% of the people saying they wanted to do more. So again, I think this is really important. It makes me feel very good and fuzzy, because obviously if more people are doing marketing, more people are going to want to watch our webinars every week. There'll be more work for us, etc. But overall level of marketing, that was by far the biggest, 62% I think it was, of people were planning to increase. And if you add the ones that were going to do the same or increase together, that was over, that was well over 85%, something like that. A lot more people were intending to do planning. I think people really needed to readjust their strategy. So a lot of investment in planning. And of course, if any of you are interested, you can use our A10 marketing planning to help you with that. If any of the Annika team could add that into the link into the chat, that would be brilliant. And then these were quite similar. So the next biggest ones was campaigns to increase sales conversions, sales and leads, which is really reflected in the previous couple of slides. But brand awareness, traffic acquisition, and customer retention. And I don't want everybody to. It's a bit like conversion rate optimization. If you improve the effectiveness of your website, all your channels are going to be more effective. But don't just go after new customers. Make sure you look after the ones you've got, because you don't want to have a leaky funnel. It's all very well putting stuff in the top, but it's really important that you don't lose things out the bottom. With regard to budgets, this is the proportion of revenue. So you can see it did move quite a lot. So in 2020, 12% of you didn't spend anything at all. Nearly 50% of you spent 1 to 5%, 24% 6 to 10, and then about 25%. Only about 20% was spending more than 16%. Obviously, if you've got an e-commerce website where you might have to spend 15%, 10 to 15% is quite common. But that was quite a small proportion of people that had e-commerce only. So you can see that the guys here with really big proportion were actually quite small. That will shift significantly with what people's plans were for 21. And you can see that the people that were planning to spend nothing had shrinked significantly down to about 10 or 15%. Interestingly, this group gained a few more but lost a few more. So overall, the guys who were planning to spend between 6 and 15% become a much bigger proportion of a third. So I looked at this in a lot more detail, and this was the analysis that I did. So you can see the numbers of people involved. This is by didn't have a website, e-commerce websites, lead generation sites, and had both. That was the majority of that, nearly adds up to 90. So the guys which had no website, it looks like 20%, no budget and no website. They're probably pre-startup, but you can see the majority of those, were spending 1 to 5%. And then e-commerce websites, again, you've got, you do need to spend more with e-commerce websites. So you can see that you do get these higher percentages. And then obviously with both, that's when you've got both lead generation and e-commerce. That's where you get a much larger number of people in the 6 to 10% bracket. I also looked at this based on the size of turnover, and you can see that these are the numbers here. This lot adds up to 100%, just in case you wanted to do the maths. So the people with a turnover of less than 100%, that represented the quarter of the people with no budget. And then if you add the ones with a turnover of less than 500, that's where the guys with no budget. And to me, this is a bit like investing in a marketing team. If you want to be a bigger company, you need to invest earlier on. And I think this is why a lot of you guys are struggling to grow, possibly, is because if you're only doing owned and earned media, you're not going to have the same potential as if you're doing paid. Now, the interesting one for me was just the range of 1 to 5%. So you can see a lot of people in the 100 to 500,000 were in this category. but so were the massive companies. But then if you've got a turnover of more than 100 million, then if you are spending 5% of that, that's a huge amount of money. So Sue's saying how it would be great to have a team of people. Yes, I know. It's surprising how often you just rely on the people that are already there for a heck of a long time. But you can see that the ones that have the really big budgets were in the 5 to 10 million category, and also in this sort of this range here. So I would definitely say that the larger companies did have the bigger chunks of pots of money, but the 1 to 5%, that was the one which was the most popular, was pretty spread, but these bigger budgets were usually in the domain of the larger companies. With regard to change from this year to next year, we saw that e-commerce websites, 10% of them were decreasing their budgets, which obviously is a little bit disappointing, but it might be they were in sectors that had a tough time. But you can see that a massive majority of people, no change or increasing. And in fact, the number of people that, I've used the same figures before. So this is the 2021 figures. So you can see that, no budget, most people move to the next category. With regard to the size of the company, you can see that a lot of the bigger companies either weren't changing, and I guess that's because their budgets are probably set. They're so big anyway that that they probably can't go up to the next category. The exception were in this sort of around here and around here, where you did get a few more that were increasing their budgets. But actually, it's nice to see that the increase in budget was pretty much across the board. And then there was a couple of exceptions, and I suspect that was more industry specific. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough data, to do this by sector. But I'm guessing that will probably be the reason for that one. So this was the percentage of those budgets that were spent on digital. So of course, some of them were spending stuff on traditional as well. So the 0 is not only that probably means these are the guys that didn't have a budget in the first place. So that's pretty similar to the previous screens. And then the 26% is the ones that are spending between 1 and 20% of digital marketing. I do think that people may have misunderstood this slightly, because obviously you have got this big chunk of people that are spending all of it, majority of digital. If you look at the IAB figures, I haven't seen, obviously this year's not come out, but it's nearly 60% of all ad spend now is actually on digital. So I was expecting, this to be the majority, which, it's slightly less than that. So again, I think that this question maybe needed to be worded slightly different, so that only the people that had a budget were included. So again, we can live and learn and improve it for next year. Okay, so the next slides are really easy. They're just word clouds. So we asked a couple of questions about what was new, what was emerging. So this is new channels and techniques, and using the word cloud, you can see that 31 or a third of the people mentioned virtual. 23% it was virtual events, but you can see virtual events were really, really popular, but also virtual training, online training, webinars and networking. So this was a word dump for what everybody was talking about. So things like videos is really quite low, but everything to do with virtual and events was really and if anybody's wondering what Benedict has got into here, we have got one respondent who is volunteers for the marketing for a Benedictine monastery, and Richard, and he wrote a very interesting thing that happened to mention Benedict, so I kept it in because I thought that was quite interesting. With regard to emerging technologies, by far AI came out, VR, virtual. You got a bit on video. Clubhouse was mentioned a couple of times. Um, artificial intelligence was mentioned as well, which is why AI comes in there. Chat, and a few others, remote working, etc., which I thought was really interesting. And then help or training needed. Loads of people just wrote digital marketing. So I took that out because I took marketing out because it just referred to everything. So a lot on social and paid, which is great because paid social is our. So this picks out the individual words, but of course paid social was by far the most popular. Generation refers to lead generation. So again, that in combination. Media, I think that was also in combination with paid media. Lots on analytics, with the GA4 coming out, which is a new service that we're offering. So if anybody's interested in finding out about how you can update your GA4, if you want to leave a note, we'll contact you. We've got a package about GA4. The one I was surprised about was nobody really mentioned Core Vitals, which was originally announced by Google to be a website update around usability, speed, mobile usability. Was originally going to be in May. It has been delayed by a little bit of time. So if any of you are interested in help with or want to know what Google Core Vitals is, or you want help with GA4, please put a note in the chat, or email me later, or email Angie. Angie, if you can put your email address in, Angie Padfield, she can help with that as well. So I thought this was interesting. The amount of training we've done on paid social, I was really surprised. I thought everybody absolutely was knocking this out of the park. I know that there's a really high skill source shortage. It's very difficult to get new paid social people. In fact, we're advertising for that role at the moment. If anybody knows anybody, we've got a vacancy in our paid social team because it's such a big area for us. And I think that's the last slide. And I think I'm all on time. So that's very unusual. So I'll just see if there's any points or questions. Please do ask a few more. So somebody asked about, Simon asked, do you think paid search is down due to budget caps or freezes due to COVID? A year-on-year comparison may be useful insight if there's anything info out there. Yes, there is info out there. There's a couple of people that have done studies on this. Obviously, the IAB study will come out pretty soon. There's been studies from Facebook and Google. Merkel do a really good quarterly paid media study that's having a look at as well. I didn't look at that. I did ask people if they wanted to increase their budget on paid media, and not surprising by the rest of the results, I didn't get a big, there wasn't a big, that's important for us. So I think that may be the case. We found that there was an initial drop in costs, cost per clicks, costs per thousand in the first lockdown, but then suddenly everybody increased their budgets when they realised that they'd suddenly stopped everything and they needed to reactivate it. And we're seeing a lot of people pumping a lot more money in now. And actually, if you look at website visits in a lot of sectors, there's been massive spikes since January. A lot of confidence came in once some sort of deal was done over Brexit. Although, to be honest, we could do a whole presentation on all the issues that's caused, particularly for e-commerce and exports and imports. It's been a nightmare getting product in and out, and cost of containers. But also the US election, again, settled a lot of nerves because Trump was no longer about. So we have seen quite big spikes in traffic since January, and consequently, a lot of people have been investing more money. Angie's left her details there. So if anybody wants to contact Angie, That's great. Now, Caroline, thank you, Caroline. Yes, Merkel is spelt correctly. They are a big global agency that do this quarterly report, and they get a load of data. They run a lot of tools, so they basically have got a lot more data. Caroline's made a really, really interesting point, how paid suffers from the perception of being expensive. So people are afraid of losing money. They may have been really badly burnt. There's a lot of cowboy agencies out there that are really bad. You can start doing paid advertising from about £500 a month ad spend. And in fact, in Facebook, you can probably start lower than that. We have done loads and loads of webinars on paid, including there was a load on the conference on the 14th of February. So go and look into the resource centre and have a look and see what's coming up. With regard to that, I just wanted to mention next Friday's webinar, which is the future of digital networking. This was really popular in the survey as well. That's going to be Rajal. I haven't loaded it onto the website yet, so I haven't got that, but I will just provide you with a link, because I think it would be quite useful for you to click through to where, so it isn't live, but this is incorrect. But if you click on the link, this is out of date actually, but if you go over to there, you'll get to the resource page on the website. And if you could also add a link to the resource page there as well. And then the other thing, that as we've been talking so much about digital skills, I wanted to promote our DMI course. Now, the DMI course, which many of you are aware of, we run once a quarter, and it's a 12-day course that we do actually as a hybrid course. So every Wednesday at the moment, we've got the training room open, but we're also sending it out virtually. So it's perfect for learning. You can sign up to individual days, and if you do virtual only, there's a big discount on this. This actually ends up with a DMI qualification, and we are, if you want to click on there, and again, if you want to speak to Angie, we will be running an open day on that, probably in the end of May, to get people in, so you can find out more about it. But the DMI course, you can also take the option of taking a CIM qualification as well. Thank you, Angie. It's brilliant. We put all our own staff through it. It covers 10 different modules, all the stuff we've been talking about. There's a whole day on each of those. And also going forward, I'm also going to be offering individual webinars as well. You can sign up for this, of course, but there's some additional training from the DMI which I'll be able to offer to you in the future as well. So unless there's any more questions, I don't think we've had any more. Or anybody else wants to add anything? I'd like to thank everybody that took part in the survey. What I will probably do is we'll do a new version November, December, try and collect the data a little bit earlier this time. Obviously, you can download it in the handouts. I did notice a couple of typos. Unfortunately, my spell check on PowerPoint just seems to miss some of them. So I apologise for that. And I will reload out the PDF and put that onto the website, onto the resource. So unless anybody's got anything else, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And if you enjoyed that today, then please leave us a review, because we love to hear your feedback. And I look forward to hosting Rajel's webinar next week. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.